Mast and sail had gone over the side as well. A drenching sea followed as the boat lost headway, and Rasmunsen sprang to the bailing bucket. Several boats hurtled past them in the next half hour, small boats, boats of their own size, boats afraid, unable to do aught but run madly on. Then a 10-ton barge, at imminent risk of destruction, lowered sail to windward and lumbered down upon them. "Keep off! Keep off!" Rasmunsen screamed. But his low gunwale ground against the heavy craft, and the remaining correspondent clambered aboard. Rasmunsen was over the eggs like a cat, and in the bow of the Alma, striving with numb fingers to bend the hauling lines together. "Come on!" a red-whiskered man yelled at him. "I've 1,000 dozen eggs here," he shouted back. "Give me a tow. I'll pay you." "Come on!" they howled in chorus. A big whitecap broke just beyond, washing over the barge and leaving the Alma half swamped. The men cast off, cursing him as they ran up their sail. Rasmunsen cursed back and fell to bailing, the mast and sail like a sea anchor still fast by the halyards, held the boat head on to wind and sea and gave him a chance to fight the water out. 3 hours later, numbed, exhausted, blathering like a lunatic, but still bailing, he went ashore on an ice-strewn beach near Caribou Crossing. 2 men, a government courier and a half-breed voyager, dragged him out of the surf, saved his cargo, and beached the Alma. They were paddling out of the country in a Peterborough, and gave him shelter for the night in their storm-bound camp. Next morning they departed, but he elected to stay by his eggs, and thereafter the name and fame of the man with 1,000 dozen eggs began to spread through the land. Gold-seekers who made in before the freeze-up carried the news of his coming. Grizzled old-timers of 40 Mile and Circle City, sourdoughs with leather jaws and bean-calloused stomachs, called up dream memories of chickens and green things at the mention of his name. Dyea and Skagway took an interest in his being, and questioned his progress from every man who came over the passes, while Dawson, golden omeletless Dawson, fretted and worried, and waylaid every chance arrival for word of him. But of this Rasmunsen knew nothing. The day after the wreck he patched up the Alma and pulled out. A cruel east wind blew in his teeth from Tagish, but he got the oars over the side and bucked manfully into it, though half the time he was drifting backward and chopping ice from the blades. According to the custom of the country, he was driven ashore at Windy Arm. 3 times on Tagish saw him swamped and beached, and Lake Marsh held him at the freeze-up. The Alma was crushed in the jamming of the floes, but the eggs were intact. These he back-tripped 2 miles across the ice to the shore, where he built a cache which stood for years after and was pointed out by men who knew. 1,000 frozen miles stretched between him and Dawson, and the waterway was closed. But Rasmunsen, with a peculiar tense look in his face, struck back up the lakes on foot. What he suffered on that lone trip, with naught but a single blanket, an axe, and a handful of beans, is not given to ordinary mortals to know. Only the Arctic adventurer may understand. Suffice that he was caught in a blizzard on Chilkoot and left 2 of his toes with the surgeon at Sheep Camp. Yet he stood on his feet and washed dishes in the scullery of the Powona to the Puget Sound, and from there passed coal on a P.S. boat to San Francisco. It was a haggard, unkempt man who limped across the shining office floor to raise a second mortgage from the bank people. His hollow cheeks betrayed themselves through the scraggy beard, and his eyes seemed to have retired into deep caverns where they burned with cold fires. His hands were grained from exposure and hard work, and the nails were rimmed with tight-packed dirt and coal dust. He spoke vaguely of eggs and ice packs, winds and tides, but when they declined to let him have more than a second thousand, his talk became incoherent, concerning itself chiefly with the price of dogs and dog food, and such things as snowshoes and moccasins and winter trails. They let him have $1,500, which was more than the cottage warranted, and breathed easier when he scrawled his signature and passed out the door. 2 weeks later he went over Chilkoot with 3 dog sleds of 5 dogs each. One team he drove, the 2 Indians with him driving the others. At Lake Marsh they broke out the cache and loaded up, but there was no trail. He was the first in over the ice, and to him fell the task of packing the snow and hammering away through the rough river jams. Behind him he often observed a campfire smoke trickling thinly up through the quiet air, and he wondered why the people did not overtake him, for he was a stranger to the land and did not understand. Nor could he understand his Indians when they tried to explain. This they conceived to be a hardship, but when they balked and refused to break camp of mornings, he drove them to their work at pistol point. When he slipped through an ice bridge near the White Horse and froze his foot, tender yet and oversensitive from the previous freezing, the Indians looked for him to lie up. But he sacrificed a blanket, and with his foot encased in an enormous moccasin, big as a water bucket, continued to take his regular turn with the front sled. Here was the cruelest work, and they respected him, though on the side they rapped their foreheads with their knuckles and significantly shook their heads. One night they tried to run away, but the zip-zip of his bullets in the snow brought them back, snarling but convinced. Whereupon, being only savage Chilkoot men, they put their heads together to kill him, but he slept like a cat, and waking or sleeping, the chance never came. Often they tried to tell him the import of the smoke wreath in the rear, but he could not comprehend and grew suspicious of them, and when they sulked or shirked, he was quick to let drive at them between the eyes, and quick to cool their heated souls with the sight of his ready revolver. And so it went, with mutinous men, wild dogs, and a trail that broke the heart. He fought the men to stay with him, fought the dogs to keep them away from the eggs, fought the ice, the cold, and the pain of his foot which would not heal. As fast as the young tissue renewed, it was bitten and scarred by the frost, so that a running sore developed into which he could almost shove his fist. In the mornings, when he first put his weight upon it, his head went dizzy, and he was near to fainting from the pain. But later on in the day it usually grew numb, to recommence when he crawled into his blankets and tried to sleep. Yet he, who had been a clerk and sat at a desk all his days, toiled till the Indians were exhausted, and even outworked the dogs. How hard he worked, how much he suffered, he did not know. Being a man of the one idea, now that the idea had come, it mastered him. In the foreground of his consciousness was Dawson, in the background his 1,000 eggs, and midway between the two his ego fluttered, striving always to draw them together to a glittering golden point. This golden point was the $5,000, the consummation of the idea, and the point of departure for whatever new idea might present itself. For the rest, he was a mere automaton. He was unaware of other things, seeing them as through a glass darkly, and giving them no thought. The work of his hands he did with machine-like wisdom, likewise the work of his head. So the look on his face grew very tense, till even the Indians were afraid of it, and marveled at the strange white man who had made them slaves and forced them to toil with such foolishness. Then came a snap on Lake LeBarge, when the cold of the outer space smote the tip of the planet, and the force ranged 60 and odd degrees below zero. Here, laboring with open mouth that he might breathe more freely, he chilled his lungs, and for the rest